I'm going to start with the exterior pockets. Now, if you don't want exterior pockets, it's pretty simple. You just cut your exterior pieces on the solid line and sew them to your B piece on each side, and then open that seam up and top stitch on both sides. But I'm going to show you how to do both exterior pockets. The first is the inseam pocket, and for that you will need one exterior piece and two lining pieces, and all of them are cut out on the solid line. And you'll need one of your B pieces cut out on the dotted line. Now you can also put a magnet in this pocket or not. I'll show you what they both look like. This is the pocket without a magnet, and it's very nice for just dropping your things in. And I've been carrying this purse around and I like it. However, sometimes if my purse falls, the things fall out of the pocket. So I did include a magnet version, and you can stabilize it with some vinyl or not. That's just to make it a little more stable and for a little decorative look. So I will show you how to do that. Also, if you have a little end magnet, something that goes on the top like this, it doesn't want to slip over this fabric, but you can do the end magnet like that. So I will explain how to do these different options. Okay, so you will need your exterior and lining pieces. If you're doing the vinyl stabilizer, cut out 2 pieces of vinyl, 1.5 inches square. You'll need your magnets. You can use 14mm or 18mm. And I use Peltex as a backing to stabilize them on the back. You can use canvas or some other stiff interfacing as well, plus a seam ripper. I'm going to start by sewing the B piece to one of these lining pieces. Oh, also, I've already marked the lining to the 2 lining pieces, both where the magnet will be, and that marking is on the pattern piece. But if you have a different shape, a different size magnet than the 18mm one, just put the top of the magnet 1 inch from the top of the piece. And this does not apply if you're doing the edge magnet. If you're doing the edge magnet, you're not going to install it quite yet. And if you're not doing a magnet, just do the sewing steps without the magnet steps. So I'm going to sew together one B piece and one lining A piece. And this pattern has a 3/8 inch seam allowance, which is 1 centimeter. And I will sew together one of the lining pieces and one of the exterior pieces. I'm going to set aside this piece for a moment and go back to my piece that's attached to the top B accent piece. I'm going to open up this seam and top stitch. Every time I top stitch, I lengthen my stitch, especially when I'm sewing over vinyl. But I am not going to do the same thing for this. What I am going to do is get my seam ripper out, and I need to, what I did to make my markings was I centered this little washer on my interfacing and on the vinyl, and then I'm going to use this seam ripper to rip these lines that I made. And I will do the same with the fabric. Remember, this fabric is completely optional. Be careful when you do this, it's easy to go a little too far. So just make sure you're only getting the line that you drew. Okay, this is going to be the back piece, and so for that, I am going to use the wider part of my magnet. I am going to put it first through my vinyl piece, if you're using one of those, and then I'm going to put it through the fabric, through the stabilizer, and finally through the washer. And now I will bend the prongs outward. And I will repeat that with my other side. Okay, so I have both of these attached, and I will now top stitch them. Now make sure that I'm not going to sew over the seam allowance, so I moved that out of the way in the back. And I'm just going to edge stitch the edge of my vinyl. I have just enough room with my presser foot, but if you don't, you can switch to a zipper foot. Okay, for this next step, I'm going to put these magnets together, and if you don't have magnets, just put the fabric together. And I'm going to match up these seams at the edge. I am going to open up my seam right here. And I'm going to be matching these as close as I can. And I will be only stitching 1.5 inches, so I'm going to go ahead and mark that now. 1.5 inches. And I'll mark that on the other side as well. So I'm going to be stitching right in the middle of the seam. It's called stitching in the ditch. And I want to match these seams up when I start. Oops. Forgot my needle's not quite in the middle because of how I moved it a moment ago. All right, and if you need to undo your magnet and lift up your fabric to make sure that you are still stitching this seam right directly on top of the other one. And I back stitch when I get to the end. Then I'm going to turn around and do it on the other side as well. I'll now do the same thing on the other side. I'm just lifting up my fabric enough that I can see the seam underneath. I forgot to mention I'm sewing 1.5 inches for the small, but it's 2 inches for the large. Okay. So that is what it looks like now. And now we need to undo this magnet if you have a magnet. And fold both the very bottom lining and the top accent piece back. Now what I'm going to do is stitch all the way across, top stitching. Now the reason I did the pocket like this, instead of just one big slip pocket, is I wanted to make it a little harder for things to fall out. So that's why there's this edge on each side. And honestly, I think it's fun to try out different types of pockets. Okay. Now I'm going to decrease my stitch to maybe about 2 or 1.5. And I'm going to stitch back and forth between these two top stitch lines on this side and on this side. And that is just to help this pocket from ripping over time. I'll do that at the corner of the pocket. And I'm going to stitch back and forth a few times. And I will do the same thing on this side too. I forgot to mention, because my kids keep coming in and out of the house, that you can, at this stage, you would put in this edge magnet on the side, and then you would measure where you want it on the back, and you would put that in. But the very last thing we will do is baste around all these layers. And I'm going to baste around all these layers. Make sure to stay in the seam allowance. So you're now finished with your first pocket.